Hi all. In this video, we will discuss on what is a risk and how is that you can identify the risk. So before understanding what is a risk, we will discuss on what is a risk event. What is a risk event? Event is a specific or a discrete occurrence. When I say discrete occurrence is an uncertain event. Uncertain event may or may not occur. So it is an uncertain event that can have an impact to the organization. This impact can be a positive impact or for a negative impact, but predominantly risk is seen as a negative impact for the organization. So when you define what is a risk event, risk is a product of probability and impact. When I say probability, what does a probability mean? Probability meaning frequency of occurrence. What is an impact? Impact is the magnitude. If a risk is going to materialize, what is the impact to the organization in monetary terms or in qualitative terms as to what is a risk, high or medium or low for the organization? So whenever you speak on risk, you have to define these two terms. What is the frequency of occurrence? If the risk materializes, what is the impact to the organization? So risk event can be a possibility of loss or causing an injury. So for example, risk event can be a loss of key personnel. It can be an attack. It can be any type of cyber attack. It can be a fire at data center. All these are a risk event. So when I say risk event, it is an uncertain event. It may or may not occur in future. So now when we understand what is a risk event, we have to now understand how is that I can identify a risk in the organization. How is that you can identify the risk in the organization? So risk identification. So there are various methods. So these methods will be followed by the risk practitioner or the risk manager in the organization, or they will look for the various ways or sources by which they can identify the risk in the organization. This is quite challenging because it needs a little bit of an expertise or an experience in the industry to identify what are the risks the organization might foresee in future. So first method is called as historical or evidence-based methods. What is historical or evidence-based method? It is review of historical events. Events meaning something which has already occurred in the past. So based on which you can identify what are the risks in the organization. For example, you can look for previous incident reports. So this will give you a fair idea as to what are the incident or what are the vulnerabilities that had been identified in the system. That is one of the risk factor. You can look for the previous audit reports as well, by which you can capture what are the points that had been added or qualified by the auditor as to the vulnerabilities. What are the weaknesses in the internal audit system? What are the various weaknesses or recommendations that had been referred to by the auditor in the audit report? So a risk manager can get a fair idea by reading the audit report as well. By reading the annual reports or press releases, you can as well look for what is the risk in the organization. So by reading the annual report, you can get a fair idea where the organization stand. You can look for the front page or the forward where the board of directors or senior management would have given on how the business performs, what is that they are expecting in the future, what is the strategy by which the business is moving on, what are the competitive edge for the organization. Then on the press releases relating to the competitors, relating to the industrial needs. So this will give you a fair idea as to what are the risks the organization might foresee in future. So this one is one of the methods by which you can identify the risk. The second approach is called a systematic approach. Systematic approach is also called as expert opinion. What is a systematic approach or a expert opinion? Here the risk manager examines or questions the business process managers to determine the potential parts of the failure, like interviewing, having a knowledge base with the business partners or the managers. So they hear the auditors or the risk managers will review the business process. They will review the vulnerability assessment reports. They will review the BCP and DRP plans. So by reviewing this or by conducting interviews or by conducting workshops, you can review or you can have a systematic approach of risk identification, having interviews or workshops with the managers or the employees or the customers or the auditors. You can look for what are the various risks the organization can foresee. So this is one of the methods. The third method is called as inductive method. What is an inductive method? It is a theoretical analysis. What is a theoretical analysis? You can examine a process to determine the potential points of failure, for which by you can do a pen testing or you can call it as penetration testing. Before reviewing or after reviewing the business process, after identifying what are the vulnerabilities, you can examine the actual process, look for what are the weaknesses in the system. If a penetrator or an attacker is trying to attack the system, how is that you can penetrate into the network? What are the weaknesses in the system? So that is a theoretical analysis or an inductive method analysis by which you can identify the risk. The fourth method is by looking for the existing taxonomy. What is existing taxonomy? What is taxonomy? Taxonomy is classification. So by looking onto the classification of risk. So as an organization, they will classify the risk based on their nature of business. So when they classify based on the nature of business, for example, they will classify under various categories. The first category being financial risk. What is a financial risk for an organization? Maybe for making cash, making liquidity. So making liquidity of funds, there can be a financial risk. What is the market capitalization? To what extent you share the market with your competitors can be a financial risk. Business risk. How your competitors are having the future strategy. So more from a competitive edge. How is that you can brand your product? Competitive edge is one of the business risk. There can be a reputation risk. Look for or conduct surveys or have social media connects by which you can look for what is the reputation the organization has in the market. Then on operational risk. Operational more related to human resources, how you are going to manage the human resources of the organization. What is the attrition rate? How is that you are going to maintain the human resources in the organization? So that is going to be an operational risk. Then you might have a strategic risk, which is relating to the regulatory changes. So another one can be a strategic risk. Strategic is always futuristic. So what is the regulatory changes you might foresee? What are the technological changes that you can hit? or that can hit the organization. All these can be futuristic in nature. What is a strategic risk the organization can foresee? So this is what is a classification of risk. By this method, you can also identify the risk the organization will foresee. So these are broad ideas as to how you can identify the organization's risk. Again, as I told, this depends on the expertise of the risk manager or the risk practitioner or the auditor to identify what and all the type of risk the organization can foresee. So there is a standard approach by which you have to look for the risk identification process, which is called as the steps that are involved in risk identification process. So we will see the risk identification process steps in the next video. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.